Oregon, Ohio State, the Rose Bowl. That's the game I'm going to. We will be out in Pasadena. We'll be on the sidelines for this game. Unbelievable. I grew up in rural Georgia. I have as much reverence for the Rose Bowl venue as anybody that grew up on the West Coast, as anybody who grew up in the Big Ten. I just do. I get it. You don't have to explain the Rose Bowl to me. I understand it. I understand the historical tie. This is historical Pac-10 versus Big Ten, and even though they're in the same conference now, we got it. We got what we want. This could, for all intents and purposes, be the national title game. We don't know that, but there is a school of thought out there that these are the two best teams in the country, and due to the jacked-up nature of the college football playoff format, this year at least, we're seeing them in the quarterfinals. You know what? Whatever. I'm going to enjoy it. So this is New Year's Day. It's in its traditional 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Pacific kickoff. I am checking the weather. Pate State forecast right now is we're going to get ourselves a nice low 70s, mostly clear day, just enough cloud cover for a little sunset filtration. It's great. It's wonderful. This was a 5-Chalai Classic when these teams played earlier this year. We were at that game as well. It was in Eugene. It was awesome. I think 32-31 was the final. So what do we see here? Well, we talk about the freeze point a lot on the show. Of course, the freeze point is a very familiar theme with teams like these because these are two of maybe the best teams in the country. So there aren't many teams that can hang with them. And the whole concept of the freeze point is if you can't get down to 32 degrees, then you're not going to freeze. And most of these teams, figuratively, cannot meet the freeze point against Ohio State and Oregon, but they meet each other's freeze point. So you got to be really careful in games like these. When you look at Ohio State versus everyone else this year, it doesn't matter so much. Not because those games didn't happen, but because the game against Oregon will be different, just like the first one was different. And I don't say that disrespectfully to Ohio State because the same thing applies to Oregon. Ohio State and Oregon can do things to each other that no other team in the country is probably capable of doing to them, but it's especially a key for Oregon because they're the only team to score 17 plus on Ohio State. Every other team scored 17 or less. Oregon hung 32 on them the first time due to athletes, due to matchups, and due to precision. You remember Evan Stewart going off in this game. 7 catches, 149. Tez Johnson and him combined for 14 for 224, 2 touchdowns. They had 6 explosive passes in this game. That accounts for a quarter of that stat given up all year by Ohio State. So, the precision point, the precision piece, if you will, to me that's the most important. Because if you watch Dillon Gabriel all year, if you watch this Oregon offense all year, but you watch them especially against Ohio State, very rarely is a guy just running free. It's precision. Everything is just boom, boom, boom. It's timing, it's rhythm, it's poise, it's precision. And that's the benefit of having a guy like Dillon Gabriel. And you can look at it going into a game in a rematch and say, oh, we got to shut him down, foolishly. Or you can look at it and say, well, we understand you don't shut a guy like that down. We can limit him. We can fluster him. We can maybe make him do what we want him to do, but we're not going to shut him down. Nor is Oregon going to shut down Will Howard. So that's the other part of this. The quarterback play in this game the first time, I think you remember Gabriel. Do you remember Will Howard? Because up until about 5 minutes ago against Tennessee, the only other 300-yard passing performance he had had this year was against Oregon. They both played exceptional ball. Both teams may have played their best game to date in the game they played against each other. So if we get a repeat of that, could be another 5-Chalai Classic, could be an instant classic. But here's the real key, because I don't think you'll shut Will Howard down. I especially think the juice that they've got to be feeling as a team and as a program coming off the Tennessee game and the way they chose to attack Tennessee being the total antithesis of the way they went about it against Michigan has got to have them feeling really good, but that's not the key to me. The key to me is I know Will Howard will have success throwing the ball. I know that. I think I know that at least. If he doesn't, it would surprise me. I'll put it that way. That wasn't what cost Ohio State the first time around. What cost Ohio State, I'm standing right there on the field watching them run for 122 in the first half, and you think, well, they got really geared up. It's going to be a downhill assault in the second half. 19 yards rushing in the second half against Oregon. And it's not that Oregon was up 2 or 3 scores and they were playing catch-up. This was back and forth. 1 possession leads either way the whole game. I've got in my hand a piece of paper that tells me what teams have done against Oregon this year. See, Ohio State's been pretty shut down defensively outside of playing Oregon. Oregon's given up some points. They've faced 3 college football playoff teams this year. They gave up 34 to Boise, 31 to Ohio State, 37 to Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. You can call that a padlock stat if you want to. I don't. Here is the more interesting / concerning number. Rush yards per game in those 3 matchups, they gave up 218 on the ground. Oregon has averaged allowing over 215 rushing yards against the college football playoff teams that they faced this year, which is important because against all the other competition, 98.5. So when they face legitimate teams, when they face those teams that meet the freeze point in terms of rushing attacks, they really meet it against Oregon. You can run the ball against Oregon, but there's a reason Oregon's undefeated because it's not one thing and one thing only that you have to do to beat them. Ohio State, here was the issue last time. It's kind of an either-or defensively, and I think this will track in this game as well. I think there's a ton of carryover from the last game to this game. I feel like Ohio State's got to get one or the other. See, last game, they did not get to Gabriel, but they also didn't limit explosive plays. You may think, okay, conventional wisdom, if you've got an elite defense, is you send the house, and you may expose yourself to some big plays, but the trade-off is what? The trade-off is you get to the quarterback. So you affect him, maybe you force turnovers, and in the end, you don't care that you gave up a couple of explosive plays because in the aggregate, the turnovers, the pressure, the third and longs you forced, they were enough to where with your own scoring potential, it tilted the game in your favor. Well, last time they played Oregon, they didn't get to Gabriel, but also Oregon had 6 scoring drives, and 4 of those 6 scoring drives were 5 plays or less. So Gabriel stays clean, and they still throw the ball down the field, and they still hit explosive plays. That's the stuff that can't happen. You don't have to shut them down. You don't even have to completely eliminate the explosive play, but man, you got to get more pressure on him than you did last time. Or if you don't, you've got to make them march down the field. Now, my assumption here, and this is not getting in the head of Jim Knowles a whole heck of a lot, but my assumption is they don't look at the matchup and say, we're going to pressure Dylan Gabriel, we're going to get him on the ground 4 or 5 times, we're going to do to him what Georgia's done to Quinn Ewers. I don't think they'll do that because I think they understand how tough a task that is. Gabriel's really elusive. He is really good at moving in the pocket and moving the launch point and extending plays. Your best bet is to look across the field and say, if you're going to score, you're going to do it in the 8, 10, 12 play variety instead of the 3, 5, 6 play variety. And if Oregon does that, if they put together that lethal and methodical an offensive performance against you, well, they were the better team, and you tip your cap. But you're Ohio State. You got the best defense in the country, so you don't think they can do it. That's exactly how you should feel. Think about the coaching staffs here. I said this the first time, and I'll say it again, because anybody I talked to in the coaching world about this matchup said the first time around, Ryan Day and Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly should be an advantage over Dan Lanning and Will Stein and Tosh Lupoy. Now, they said that the first time around. And candidly, I thought Oregon outcoached Ohio State the first time around. I always hesitate to say that because you can't really know. So on the very surface, it felt like that the first time around. The people behind the scenes are saying the exact same thing the second time around. In fact, they're going one better. They're saying, boy, if you're lucky enough, can you imagine the audacity? If you're lucky enough to get them one time, that even lessens your chances more that your big 3 are going to match and exceed their big 3 the second time around. By the way, the thinking there is just experience. Coaches are pretty old school in their thought about what wins in the postseason. Players, first and foremost, but they both got players. So then if you're looking at staffs and caliber and quality of staff, there's just a whole lot more length of tooth, as Meemaw would say, over on that Ohio State sideline. I mean, Chip Kelly's been a head coach longer than Stein and Lupoy have been coordinators by a mile, and Dan Lanning is even still a relatively young coach. So here is my other wild card. Before we take a look at what the model thinks, here's my other wild card in this game. What is the lasting impression in our minds? You don't remember anything about Oregon because it feels like 9 years since Oregon's played. Your lasting memory of Ohio State is pretty fresh, and it's frozen because they played it in like 20-degree conditions, and that is them bombing away on Tennessee. And coming off the Michigan game and how toxic it was and they opened that offense up. They let the horses run. They threw it to Jeremiah Smith early and often. He took over the game. Egbuka was there for him. Will Howard felt himself like Will Howard probably hasn't felt all year. That's the lasting impression. I'll tell you what the best defensive minds in the country can do. If they're next up and you play over your skis offensively, especially throwing the ball right before you play them, what you'll find throughout history is sometimes you assume that offense will tilt on you a little bit. Tilting out of confidence. Tilting because they may be a little more top-heavy than they should be. They may lean into the pass a little bit more than they should. And you think to yourself, we're good enough, we're skilled enough, and we're tactical enough to where might we want to lay back and let them feel that way about themselves? Might we want to let them throw on the blinders like a horse in a horse race? Horse throws on the blinders, they don't see to their left or right. Now, the horse is not supposed to see to his left or right. People are. Quarterbacks are. But sometimes, if you get that locked in and you're that sure that you're going to do something well against a defense, that defense, especially if it's got maybe like a Dan Lanning sort of mind to it, it can take advantage of that, and you can lean and lean and lean, and you tip, and you end up playing right into their hands. I still think the run game is what wins the game for Ohio State if it does win it. They're going to get theirs through the air. I also think they can lose the game through the air. Let's take a look at what the model thinks. Let's take a look at what our friends over at FanDuel have right now. They've got Ohio State minus 2.5. The model is right at a pick'em. So we think there's a little smidge of inflated value on Ohio State right now that's just a byproduct of the last game. If I ran a sports book, I'd put the exact same number up. Because if I put pick'em up, I would get drowned in Ohio State money. I changed my mind on how I think this game's going to go, ironically, after the Ohio State-Tennessee game. I believe that the result you see in the Rose Bowl will make you look and say, boy, how did it shift that radically? Or it may make you say, how does an Ohio State team that did what they did to Tennessee get beat? Well, it's because you get different versions of a team every week. But I don't think Ohio State's going to play poorly at all. I think they're going to play phenomenally. I just think Oregon's that good. So I am slightly leaning Oregon to win this game. They would cover in the aggregate, and I'm not necessarily betting it because I think there's better value out there. But I think Dan Lanning and Oregon, with more weeks to prepare, are going to sit out there, bring them into Pasadena. I think one or two quarterback mistakes on the side of Ohio State ends up being the difference in the game.